Driving a scooter as a tourist visiting Vietnam for the first time can be either the worst experience of your life or the best. Which one it ends up being depends on a few critical factors. In this video, we're going over everything you need to know about renting a scooter in Vietnam, along with a few alternatives in case you decide the risk isn't worth it. If you want to rent a scooter in Vietnam and not end up with a huge unexpected bill, then you need to avoid the common scooter rental scams. The most important tip for avoiding rental scams is to never, and I mean never ever, leave your passport or driver's license as a deposit. If that is the only thing the shop accepts, then just walk away. Once they have your passport, they can hold it hostage and you will be forced to pay whatever they say you owe them. I've heard this story so many times. A tourist leaves their passport as a deposit, and when they return the scooter before heading to the airport, the owner discovers serious damage that the tourist has to pay for. If they don't pay, they won't get their passport back and they could miss their flight. This common scam is the fake damage scam. This is where the shop insists that you damage the motorcycle even though the damage was already there when you rented it. Another variation of this scam is to overcharge you for minor scrapes and dings that they have zero intention of ever repairing. There's a few ways to combat this scam, but your first step should be to rent from a reputable shop. Google reviews are the best place to start your research. However, you need to be careful because it's not uncommon for businesses in Vietnam to pay for fake reviews. Your best bet is to start by looking at the lowest reviews first. You're looking for deal breakers such as poor scooter maintenance and staff trying to charge for pre-existing damage. Next, make sure you take photos of the scooter you're renting from every single angle before you sign the rental contract. If there's any pre-existing damage, then make sure you get a photo that clearly shows the location of it and the size of it. You should also tell the owner about the damage so they can't act surprised later on. These photos are your best protection against getting scammed, so take your time getting them. Next, let's figure out if it's actually legal for you to drive a scooter as a tourist in Vietnam. The answer to that question is yes, but with a very big asterisk at the end. If you have a motorcycle license from your home country and you have an international driving permit or IDP issued according to the 1968 Vienna Convention on Road Traffic, then you are legally allowed to drive and rent a scooter in Vietnam. You might still get fined anyway, but we'll cover that later. You've probably never heard of the Vienna Convention on Road Traffic before. But don't worry, you don't need to rush out and study or memorize it. All you need to know is whether your country has signed onto it. To save you some research, I can tell you that the US, Canada, and Australia are not signed up to the 1968 convention. But all hope is not lost. This is Vietnam, and there is a huge gray area that we'll cover in depth later in the video. For anyone with a license from those countries, you are not legally allowed to drive a scooter in Vietnam. That's because those countries I just mentioned have only ratified the 1949 Geneva Convention, and that's not the one that talks about how to treat prisoners of war, but it's the one on road traffic. You should still get that IDP anyway, because it can still come in handy if you do get stopped. Some countries, such as the UK, are signed up to both conventions. In that case, you're good to go. Just make sure you ask for the 1968 version when you're getting your IDP issued. Regardless of which IDP you can get, make sure that they stamp Category A when they issue it. Even if you don't have a motorcycle license, you can sometimes still get this stamped in the US and Canada because you are allowed to drive a moped on a normal car license. For the 1968 IDP, you also need to make sure that Category A and not A1 is stamped. The latter will not be accepted by the Vietnamese police. If you still want to ride a scooter without a motorcycle license, then the only legal solution is to rent a low-powered model that is 50cc or less, as those don't require a license in Vietnam. You can rent these low-powered models in either a petrol or electrical variant. Before renting an electric scooter though, you should check with your hotel that you can charge it there. If it's your first time planning a trip to Vietnam, it can be overwhelming to find all the best places to visit and then try to weed out the tourist traps. That's why we've created an interactive Google map and travel guide. With over 100 curated locations, including hidden temples, fantastic homestays and hotels, our favorite restaurants and street stalls, our maps will help get you the most out of your trip to Vietnam. Our personal tips are also included in each map pin. Download the map directly into your Google Maps app to find the best spots at the click of a button. You'll find the link in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen. If you want to get an IDP for your trip to Vietnam, make sure you don't fall for fake websites. If you do a web search for IDP, you'll find a bunch of different websites that pop up with very convincing names and websites. Every single one of those websites is selling you a worthless piece of paper with no legal value. To issue an IDP, you have to be officially authorized by your country's government to do so. In the US, the AAA is the official source for an IDP. In Canada, it's your provincial CAA, and in Australia, it's your state automobile association, such as the RACV. In the UK, it can be issued in stores with PayPoint. I've put a link in the description below to the official site for each of those countries so you don't get scammed. Now let's determine if renting a scooter on your Vietnam trip is actually worth it. Simply crossing the road in Vietnam can be an intense experience. Now imagine trying to drive a scooter for the first time in all of that chaos. If your palms become a little bit sweaty at that thought, then you need to keep watching because I'll go over the best alternatives later in the video. I loved renting a scooter in all the different places we visited in Vietnam. It was fantastic having the flexibility to be able to see all the little sights and explore, and that would have been really difficult, if not to say impossible, with just a grab. Having our own transportation also meant that we had a little bit more flexibility when it came to the location of hotels. For example, the awesome homestay that we stayed at in Hoi An was just a couple of blocks from the beach, but it was outside of the main tourist center. This meant we could actually sit on the balcony and enjoy the view without constant noise. If you're up for a longer motorcycle journey, then Vietnam is in some ways the ideal place for it. Since tourists aren't allowed to rent cars, the only way to see places that aren't on the tourist trail is by having a scooter or motorcycle. For example, we visited the really pretty area of Tram Tao in the northwest of Vietnam, but it was both expensive and a huge pain to get there without a motorcycle. If you've got any questions about renting or driving a scooter in Vietnam, let me know in the comments and I'll try to answer every single one. If you're going to be spending your entire trip in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, then I wouldn't bother renting a scooter. These are the toughest places to drive, even if you have experience. The main tourist sites also aren't that far apart, so getting a grab everywhere just makes a lot more sense here. Scooters also don't make sense if you're traveling as a family. By the time you've rented sufficient scooters, if your kids are old enough to drive them, you've almost paid for a private car for the whole day. I also wouldn't rent a scooter in Vietnam if it's your very first time ever riding one. The only exception would be if you've spent a lot of time riding bicycles in busy cities. For example, I used to ride my bike through downtown Houston when we lived there, and I can honestly say that was way more dangerous than riding a scooter in Vietnam. The only other tricky part about learning how to drive a scooter is getting the proper throttle control. But you can pick that up in an afternoon on a quiet road. Now it's time to get into the controversial gray zone that I promised you. The gray zone is essentially driving a scooter in Vietnam without the correct motorcycle license or IDP. Despite what my parents repeatedly told me when I was a teenager, I don't love blatantly ignoring the rules. But when a country literally makes it impossible to follow the rules, then you don't have much choice. You might think that it would be impossible to rent a scooter without the proper license or IDP, but nothing could be further from the truth. As long as you're renting a 125cc or under scooter, 99% of scooter rental shops and homestays will rent you a scooter without even batting an eyelid. Some of them will even give you a mini course on how to ride the scooter. If you've decided to be a rebel and operate in the gray zone, you'll need to know what the consequences of driving without the correct license are. just in case you get stopped by the police? The answer to this is that it depends. But since I'm not an annoying MBA professor, let me give you some more details. First of all, the likelihood of you getting stopped is very much dependent on where you're driving. We rented a scooter in Sapa, Hoi An, Ninh and Tram Tao, and we never got pulled over. We drove by police officers several times, and we also had police drive by us without giving us a second glance. If you get stopped in the rural countryside where there isn't a lot of tourist traffic, there's a good chance that the local police officer won't know the difference between the 1949 and the 1968 IDP. This is why you should still get an IDP, even if you can only get the 1949 version. If you didn't actually commit any infraction, and it's just a random traffic stop, then they might just let you go after you've shown them your IDP and driver's license. If you're planning on driving the Hajang Loop, then you're almost guaranteed to be stopped. But before we get to that, make sure you subscribe for more brutally honest travel guides that'll turn your trip into a success. The Hajang Loop is so tourist heavy that the police basically have permanent traffic stops. These guys are unlikely to be fooled by a 1949 IDP, even if you have a full motorcycle license and Category A stamped. Although you can show it to them and hope for the best, you should not expect any miracles. The most likely scenario is that you'll be issued a fine for around 3 to 4 million Vietnamese dong. That's still cheaper than a speeding ticket in the US, so it's not really a budget buster, but you do need to be aware of it. Speaking of speeding tickets, one local blog I read believed that police were actually targeting people for speeding. The speed limit is 50 an hour on the Hajang Loop, and there are plenty of speed cameras. So if you are driving with the wrong IDP, make sure to stick to the speed limit and you might have a better chance of not being pulled over. However, the bright side of getting fined is that they will issue you a receipt for the fine. This receipt usually states something to the effect that you're driving at your own risk without the correct license. Make sure you keep that receipt safe. If another cop stops you, you can simply show it to them. That should, in theory at least, stop you from getting another fine for not having the correct license. Whether that receipt will work outside of the Hajang Loop, I don't know, but it's always worth a shot if everything else fails. If you're planning on spending a lot of time in digital nomad clusters like Da Nang, then you're also going to have a much greater chance of getting pulled over. With that being said, the best way to avoid issues is to not drink any alcohol if you're planning on driving and to dress properly. So skip the rice wine and make sure you're always wearing a shirt and a helmet when driving in Vietnam. The fines are going to be less outside of the Hajang Loop, and depending on the cop, you may or may not be able to negotiate it. Vietnam is trying to clean up their image, and they want to eliminate bribes from the police force. Officially, the fine for not having the correct license or documentation should be around 400,000 to 600,000 Vietnamese dong. But if it's an informal stop, then it's kind of up to your negotiation skills. Even if you have the correct motorcycle license and the IDP, you may still end up having to pay a fine at one of these informal stops. For serious violations, the police are able to impound your scooter. However, this is by no means a common practice. In most cases, they would rather just issue you a fine. But if you decide to be an a-hole tourist to them, then they might just decide to pull that ace out of their sleeve. If you do get stopped by a police officer, put on a big smile and say "Xin Chao" with a slight head nod. From there, you want to be polite at all times. If you can, it's worth casually dropping in how much you've enjoyed your time in Vietnam, and that the Vietnamese people are very nice and always helpful. It's not a lie, and it's going to soften up the police officer a little bit. Whatever you do, don't get into an argument. You want to keep the conversation light and happy. You might be okay getting a fine for driving without the right license, but what happens if you get into an accident? Pretty much every single insurance company will deny you coverage in a scooter accident if you don't have the correct driver's license. Even the big nomad insurance companies like Safety Wing and World Nomads won't cover you. But there are a few exceptions. Insurance companies are notorious for doing anything in their power to not pay out. Even if you do have the correct driver's license and IDP, you need to make sure that your insurance company will cover you when driving a scooter in a foreign country. Sometimes they only do so if you add on adventure sports or extreme cover, and sometimes they simply won't cover you no matter what. You need to check the literal fine print of your health or travel insurance before you even think about renting a scooter. One of the few companies that I've found who will actually cover you when driving a scooter, even without a motorcycle license, is Genki Health Insurance. They explicitly say it in their terms and conditions. The only catch is that the scooter or light motorcycle has to be under 125cc if it's a petrol scooter, or under 11 kilowatts of power if it's an electric scooter. We've been using their insurance for the last few years, and I even had to make a claim with them last year when I managed to fracture 2 of my vertebrae. There's a link in the description below if you want more info. Now you know it is possible to insure yourself in the event of an accident. But what about the scooter or other people? Well, for that, you're going to have to self-insure. Technically, all registered scooters are supposed to have third-party insurance. But even if it does cover anything, it's only going to cover the medical costs of people you might injure. It does not cover any material damage that you may have caused to your own scooter or someone else's property. How much that ends up costing you is going to come down to a negotiation. For all the details, I would strongly encourage you to read this blog post from Ticket Motorcycles. They are a local company and have way more knowledge on it than I do. But here it is in a nutshell. If you're in a minor accident, you can probably just negotiate it on the spot and some cash will change hands. If it's more serious or the damage is extensive, then getting the police involved is not a bad idea, as they can act as a mediator between the two parties. If you're embarking on a longer journey, I would definitely make sure that you rent from a good shop that can help translate for you if you get into any tricky situations. Making sure that the scooter you're renting is in good condition is a great way to avoid accidents. Because our hotel in Sapporo was about 25 minutes from the main town, we had to rent whatever the hotel organized for us. That ended up being the most tired and beat up scooter of our whole trip. The first scooter we rented from them was so clapped out that it couldn't even make it up the hill to our hotel with both my wife and I on it. That's why you need to inspect the scooter you're about to rent very carefully. If possible, take it for a quick test drive. Make sure that the brakes work and drive the scooter over a few bumps to see how the suspension holds up. If it's completely worn out, you will feel every bump in the road straight up your spine. And that is less than pleasant. You should also try and get an idea of how much power the engine has left on this mini test drive. You can do that by testing the throttle response. If you have to be at full throttle to go 50k an hour on a 125cc scooter, then there's something wrong with it. Lastly, visually check that the tire pressure is good, as an under or overinflated tire can cause you to lose grip. If the thought of driving a scooter in Vietnam overwhelms you, don't worry. There are plenty of good alternatives that you can take advantage of. The first alternative is to use Grab and Shan SM to get around. These are the two biggest e-hailing or ride-sharing apps in Vietnam. They are ubiquitous, and if you're following the tourist trail in Vietnam, you can pretty much always get a rideshare to where you're going. Grab has lots of safety features in the app that you can set up. For example, it can automatically share your location and progress with a contact that you choose. I also recently discovered that the app keeps track of how long the ride is supposed to take. If that time is exceeded, you'll receive a notification on your phone asking if everything is okay and if you need police assistance. If you click yes, the app will automatically contact and share your location and vehicle information with the police. You can also turn on audio recording in the Grab app so that everything inside the car gets recorded. This is great if you're worried that the driver might try to ask for money outside of the app. If you're planning a bigger day of sightseeing, or if you want to try and explore some areas that are off the tourist trail, there is a better alternative to Grab. Hiring a private car with a driver is surprisingly affordable in Vietnam. Starting at around 2 million Vietnamese dong, you can get a private car with a driver for the day. This will include all the fuel for the day as well. If you're a family or a group of friends traveling, then this is actually a really good deal. Although technically still more expensive than renting 4 scooters, you get to be whisked around in air-conditioned comfort. Even if you're a bigger group or 2 families traveling together, you can easily find drivers with a minivan offering their services. These would typically cost you between 3 or 4 million Vietnamese dong, just depending on where you're planning on going. Another huge benefit of a private car is that you don't have to worry about figuring out how to navigate Vietnamese traffic or find parking. The best way to find these private drivers is on Facebook. Simply put out a post in the bigger Vietnam groups like this one saying how many people are traveling, when you need it, and where you need it. Trust me, within a few hours, your messages will have blown up with offers. The last alternative for those who can't get the correct license, but still want the experience of riding a scooter through Vietnam, is to join an Easy Rider tour. This is essentially where you ride on the back of a scooter with a local guide doing all the driving. You'll usually be part of a group completing the same trip. These tours are most popular on the Ha Giang Loop, where you're almost guaranteed to be stopped by the police. There are tons of companies offering this service, and they will of course tell you that it's the best way to see Vietnam. The reality is a little bit more mixed. I've heard of people absolutely loving it and also absolutely hating it. I think a lot of it depends on the skill level of your driver and the overall tour quality. Personally, I don't love the thought of sitting against a stranger for several hours a day in the hot Vietnamese sun. Another great tip that'll help you save time and money on your next trip is to watch our latest video here.